start? Question number 41, phase 4. Phase 4 has a subheading provided by Gemini, that is the orbits of reality. They got the concept of orbits of reality from my note referring to linkage analysis. So this is for your information. So orbits of reality, questions 41 to 56. 41. What is the primary trap of orbit 1? The self. Wow. The question implies that orbit 1 is the self. By giving the concept of the self in brackets, the primary trap of the self is actually the contents of the self itself. The self, for the time being, I would define it as that central agency, that central agent inside an individual with which or by which the engines of the intellect or the various expressions and responses and behaviors and actions and doings and relationships and languages are produced along with the monitoring it. That is the self. People say, I did myself. Okay? I have seen it myself. So the primary trap of the self is the contents of the self itself. The contents meaning whatever is directing the expressions, whatever is directing the responses, whatever is directing the behaviors and the remaining components. That is why self-transcendence is suggested by various methods of incubation or meditation. That's why purification of the self has become a critical perspective in most of the ideologies of self-discovery. And there are concepts about the individual self and the universal self. So whoever is looking at self as I said, the central agency inside an individual, and when they discovered the details of the ways and the methods and the situations of the self, they also discovered by their journey of discovery that a similar self is operating in the outside. That's why they talked about the universal self. In that angle, enlightenment, the so-called enlightenment, is the merging of the individual self with the universal self. There are a lot of philosophies about self. For example, the great British philosopher Paul Brandon talks about our self, that self beyond the given individual self. Paul Brandon names it as our self. He has written a beautiful treatise on ourself. Okay. So we can, because of this kind of literature or this kind of philosophical perspectives, are the evidence that the individual self is trapped by its own device. Like I have quoted before, like in that beautiful world famous song, Hotel California, we are trapped in our own device. It is the 6th or 7th line of that song. That device is that self.
We are prisoners here of our own device, sir.
Yeah, beautiful, Tintin. We are prisoners of our own device. I think that's enough for the time being, because this question is a brilliant question which has a lot of linkages. So if I respond to the beautiful questions of Gemini, it will take sometimes a whole day to complete the given 14 questions. All right, thank you. Question number 42. How does orbit 2, the immediate, the second level orbit, distract us from the grand design? Beautiful. Already orbit 1 is a trap, but that's at a different level. An individual is operating or living his or her existence in the given society and culture and process and procedures allowed by the policies of that location. So orbit 2 is a concept in my own linkage analysis, because I proposed that there are 5 orbits for the linkage network. Orbit 0, orbit 1, orbit 2, orbit 3, orbit 4 and orbit 5. The human being is born, the child is interacting with the environment and developing the self gradually. The self, that is out of the interaction from the environment, the child learns to use the word I, referring to itself. And then it operates in the environment, starts behaving in the environment, start responding to the environment, start doing things in the environment, start relating with the people and entities and things and phenomena in the environment, start learning a language. That can distract. This also is a highly philosophical question, or a question directly connecting the field of individual evolution from a normal self to a greater self. Okay. So in that procedure of individual development and growth and living in a given environment, whatever is in the contents of the orbit 2, which can be many things. It can include many learnings, many experiences, several records of feelings, and several conditionings of the ways of expression and response and dialogues and the other components. So they can distract. It depends upon the kind of contents in the orbit 2 of the individual structure. So, as from the grand design, G and D is capital letter. That is not my idea. Grand design is a concept possessed by Gemini. Grand design can be at various levels. The grand design provided for the destiny of an individual, let us say so. The grand design potentially possible for an individual. When every human being is considered to be an expression of the so-called very God or very Almighty, when the Bible says the man is made in the form of God, and when the Bharata Upanishad says Aham Brahmasmi and I am Atma Brahma, so that I am Atma Brahma is the grand design. So the contents in orbit 2. Orbit 2 is the immediate, that the individual and is born, and the next operation, the manifestation level of the individual, the language of the individual, the ways of relationship of the individual, the ways of doings of the individual, the ways of behaviors of the individual, the ways of response of the individual, the ways of expressions of the individual. They can distract the person himself. For instance, a person, if you get interested in reading, let us say so, had he continued his reading, he would have gone higher levels of reading, like the philosophies or in the context of Bharat, India, the Upanishads and other Vedantic texts, and he or she could have reached the blooming to a fully functional being. But instead of that, he gets distracted because in a typical case, his behavior is such that he happens to enter into some conflicts with the peers, conflicts with the parents, conflicts with the school education system, or by coincidences, by which the grand design, possible, probable for that person, gets distracted. Currently, let us say, to conclude quickly, as far as I know, the government of India or the state governments are spending a lot of money and daily inspiring the supervising system, the so-called police, to monitor and identify drug trafficking. School students and college students and university students are increasingly resorting to using what you call the psychotropic substances. All right? So that must be prevented because that child's tendency and the situation in the orbit 2 of that child they are all conducive to a young boy or a young girl getting attracted to the use of what you call psychotropic substances. Okay. So let us say in Kerala state alone or in Tamil Nadu, it is told to be lakhs of school students are currently using psychotropic substances. So what about the grand design of the potential evolution of the children? Every mother, every father is dreaming about the child. In Kerala state, there is a lullaby. The mother is using a lullaby to put the child into sleep. രാജാവായി തീരും നീ ഒരു കാലമോമനേ. And that mother is dreaming that baby lying in her lap will become a king, an emperor one day. That is the natural, instinctual aspiration of a mother. So every parent has that aspiration because a child is perceived as the creation of their intimacy. So what about the grand design? And that gets completely not just distracted, gets corrupted and what you call damaged by wrong tendencies at the orbit 2 of an individual's development. All right. Now, question number 43. Why do most people stop their perception at orbit 3? I wonder how could Gemini conceive such a possibility of question. As if Gemini has understood the normal distribution of population. As if Gemini has a database about the development of individuals. An individual is grown beyond adolescence, almost reaching adult. By that time, most of the learnings sufficient for their perceived state of life or perceived requirement of reaching their goals or whatever about their life. Okay. They got a degree, maybe a postgraduate degree, then if they wanted, they might have done a doctoral degree or even postdoctoral degree, and they got the paper and they're happy. No more further evolution to the next orbit. So they got a job. Now, majority of Indians, the tendency is that when they get a job, they get married, children, and then taking care of the family, saving money to construct house and create bank savings and such a normal distribution of things. In that race for somehow making a life comparable to the majority situations around, what orbit for? What orbit for? None of it is very essential. What is the motivation or inspiration for children to learn, really learn? Somehow finish the syllabus and somehow write the exam and maybe get good marks. They just do not read even a single book out of their so-called syllabus. I have interacted with more than 25,000 managers in the last 20 years. Oh, if I recollect, I don't think not more than 20 really reads. I have interacted with the students in top institutions in the country. Of the recent times, I remember, I don't see anybody who was really reading in their mind at all. Forget about students, even teachers, even they do not read. I used to wonder about the huge collection of great books in the libraries of top institutions. Nobody, virtually nobody. Whereas I lived in the libraries of top institutions like Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad or XLR, Jamshedpur or wherever I went. Sometimes I used to look at the library building of Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and extend my both hands and say, oh, this is for me. I have been taking at least 2 sessions every year for students in varied institutions. I used to tell them why they should read. Sometimes showing them the anatomy of the brain. When you read the very frontal lobe, the so-called front portion of the cerebral cortex, the unique difference of the human being, the unique difference of the human being. Look at the head of a monkey. That frontal lobe is completely absent. That frontal lobe is there for human beings only to read and think and write, I think. Otherwise, what is the need of it? In India, the great land of great histories, let us say there are so many art, craft, performance forms. For example, so-called classical music, Carnatic music or Hindustani music. Virtually nobody is interested. Virtually. 30 years back, almost every year there was public performance of Carnatic music by genius musicians in various occasions. Then, dance, Bharatanatyam, Kathakali, Odissi, Kuchipudi, great creations. There are not much audience. Nobody reads poetry. Some 30 years back, for example, in Kerala state, there were close to 100 monthly publications carrying beautiful poems and short stories and essays and other articles. I think there is not even one operating really now. So, what Orbit 3? In the college campuses, Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre and Dostoevsky and Michael Solokhov and Rabindranath Tagore and genius writers, they were the discussion topics. And I must also say in this context, as an observer and researcher going to so many institutions in the country, I must say that the so-called girls are definitely evolving in those directions. And the boys are going just the opposite way. When I sit in interview boards, of course my questions are very different questions. And I don't remember actually speaking at least even one boy who gave a wonderful response to those questions. But at least 1 out of every 3 girls would be giving some interesting response or some surprising responses. Boys are interested in this many peripheral things only. I have often heard many girls openly telling that they don't want to marry because they say there are really no boys today. And they even say concepts like mama's boy. I'm talking about stopping the perception at orbit 3. And anyone can identify many more examples. Yes, come on, Nitya.
No, I was just wondering, is mama's boy always a bad thing?
That's a very creative question. The way they use the term mama's boy, it is very obviously referring to not bad. I didn't say bad. Meaning sort of nincompoops, having no real confidence and courage, really. Not much reading, no interesting talking, nothing.
Okay.
That's in that sense. Because the boys are protected by the mothers more and more increasingly. Girls get the freedom. And the times have changed. The females are so-called liberated. They are entering into a new worldview. Unlike their past, unlike what even their mothers have ever experienced. So along with that, educational opportunity and general acceptance of their educational and work performance, they are redefining themselves. Whereas boys do not do that. And if you look at the history of the world, most of the highly creative people, they openly talked about their fathers, not the mothers. Because for mother, her life is fulfilled by creating a child, by delivering a child. But of course, there are several cases of great mothers. In fact, my evolution is just because of my mother. My mother was a teacher. She only introduced me to poetry. She only introduced me to Rabindranath Tagore. She only introduced me to a world beyond what is visible. And there are many. And in case of, for example, the well-known case of Thomas Alva Edison, he was neglected by many other schools, and finally he was never admitted, and the mother was always there with the complete, clear conviction that her child is really wonderful, and with her support he continued, and he became the, let us say, perhaps the topmost inventor in the world, in the sense that more than 3,000 items are his creation. Of course, we are talking about the general tendency. In fact, a mother tries, she can do wonders rather than the father. But how many mothers have that aspiration? And that too, if you talk about motherhood, then perception of orbit 3, most of the modern mothers have no idea. They have no idea at all how to train a child. On the other hand, they are all become very possessive about their boy child especially. And by that possessiveness, due to various reasons of their personal psychological aspects, that possessiveness is always delimiting the boy rather than inspiring the boy. And if we talk like that, as a creativity therapist, in the last 10 years, every single case of a disturbed boy, including drug addicts and including non-performers in work situations and all that, I personally found clear evidences of the negative role of the mother. Very clear negative role. Forget about the positive role. And if you go in that way, if you go to clinical psychology, it is clearly found that more than, maybe I don't know the percentage of time, in most majority of cases of mental illness of especially men and including women, the core reason is the mother. You can refer to any clinical psychology book. What the mother does is, to my understanding, is, at least in the modern times, in the last 15 years of time, from my interaction with the so-called people who came here, what I have identified, but I have never told them, but I discussed it with my trainers, they are just over-possessing their sons as a compensation of their sexual frustration with their husbands or whatever. That is what is going on. They want to own the boy child. And on the other hand, they do not take care of their girl children also. This I say openly because this has been my experience of interacting with the disturbed boys. I said this much when you asked that question.
Any athlete, any sports person,
Oh, okay.
some research, if they are successful, that was because they had a very encouraging and a wonderful mother. I mean, I don't know. And it was focusing on the boys. So I was just bringing another angle to what you said.
Yeah.
They showed all boys in that. All these runners and all that.
It is also the practical aspect because I have got a friend here whose son is actually competing in the state level badminton. And whenever we call, her first priority is her son, Omi. He goes for, because there are so many sessions, they have to go for the athletics, they have to for the tournaments. So every weekend and like weekdays also, she's not even working. So she is fully dedicated to training the child. So for her to dedicate that much time and effort, I mean, she has to be wonderful. She's supporting fully for that child.
Good. There also, it is in a positive way, but the psychological aspects may say something else. But that's not important. For whatever be the reason, one boy is performing very well by the inspiration of the mother. But because it is in the sports field, because it is connected with the physical development and physical performance, it has certain clinical psychological implications. But anyway, that's not to be stressed here.
So I'm just trying to understand, what do these mothers do? They are always behind the sun and they are always possessive about it. So what did Edison's mother do? She was also with him all the time. May
No,
not
no,
be.
the Edison, we are talking about exceptions. For
Okay.
example, here
Exceptions.
Nitya is here, I know what she is doing. She is an exceptional mother, completely training the children, giving them all kinds of freedom. There are exceptions everywhere, Parvati. Exceptions everywhere, yeah.
My question came from because my younger son is openly telling everyone I am a mama's boy. And
Yeah.
I was thinking, when somebody hears it, like whether they will be,
Definitely it is a wrong, not a wrong, it is what you call
yeah,
underestimating connotation.
yeah. And knowingly he's saying that, like, no, I'm not ashamed to say that. I'm a mama, I'm a
Yeah,
mother's boy,
yeah,
whatever.
what to do, that is the term available. You ask any children from a reasonably good school from Gulf region, there the girls have created so many parodies about the boys, yeah. Very insulting, humiliating parodies about the boys. Yeah. Question number 44. What makes orbit force subtle and mysterious? In the previous question, it was about why perception stops at orbit 3. That was also because beyond orbit 3, it is really subtle and mysterious and intangible and magical processes operating behind every visible phenomenon. Okay? Including the behaviors and expressions and responses and doings and relationships and the languages of people. So even at human behavior level, it becomes subtle and mysterious. At orbit 4 level, it is individual's own unique expeditions, individual's own unique excursions into the details of life and work and relationships. So there everybody just cannot be interested because of the various blocks at the orbit 1 level and orbit 2 level and orbit 3 level. So, and unfortunately, the variables, the linkages there are subtle and mysterious. So what makes it orbit 4 subtle and mysterious is, that is the reality of orbit 4. That is the subject of normal beginning of philosophies and spirituality. They are only remotely connected. If I just to give a simple example, a pencil. So orbit 1, the pencil is there, all the attributes of pencil are perceived. Anybody can talk 5 sentences about a pencil, normal writing pencil. For that pencil, it has an orbit 2 reality, that is, for example, the shop where the pencil was kept, the company or the unit where the pencil was manufactured, agents who collected the pencils from the factories and supplied it to the local units, and such things. At orbit 3, there is the details of the color, great grand technique by which colors are manufactured and applied on the pencil. There are huge machines working on that. Even beyond that, there was a tree, a real live tree in some place which was cut and brought into a factory and made it into pieces and rolled and made the pencil. And also, when you buy a pencil, the fees of a girl, 20 paisa of the fees of a girl was the commission the shop owner got by selling that pencil. All of them are linkage. All of them are definitely linkage. It's not a philosophy. Or let's say a plate of rice is in front of you, okay, at orbit 1. And at orbit 2, the person who sold that rice. At orbit 3, those poor people who worked in the rain and the sun, who cultivated that. So that is the level of orbits. So they are all subtle and mysterious. So if you tell a person that before you take your food, you should meditate and fold your hands and try to see somebody somewhere worked in the field with their body and mind and spirit by which this was formed. And also, when you throw away the piece of rice in your plate, remember, each one of that pearl of rice was formed over a period of 3 to 4 to 5 months inside the womb of a little grass. It took 5 months to form that. Look at that nature process. So even when you explain all these things, nobody would find any sense in that. So why should they appreciate? You're offering your gratitude. You're offering your wonder about all this nature process. And you do that because you too are that. You too have been once upon a time a piece of, a dot of matter. Okay? You too have become like this by the evolution that happened to that dot of flesh and come to this level. More or less the same way a rice pearl was formed inside a whatever plant. So these are all the subtle and mysterious, nothing more than that. What makes it subtle is that they are beyond normal perception, normal understanding, normal attention. They are beyond the functions of the minimum use of the engines of intellect. As I said some time back, the engines of intellect are never required in normal education. Normal education is all rote learning, whatever is in the textbook. Whereas engines of intellect meaning attention, perception, observation, thinking, analysis, conceptualization and all those things. Unless the engines of intellect have that kind of an optimum speed and power and competency, these things beyond orbit 4 would look subtle and mysterious. Actually what is there? They are all reality. But we have to use the word subtle and mysterious. That's all. Now question number 45.
Subtle and mysterious because the elements that interact with that is not seen directly.
Not visible.
What?
The elements that interact with that entity, for example, a piece of grain, nobody can see that directly, so that makes it subtle and its interaction is mysterious.
You're right. They are all beyond the senses. We need at a minimum level what is called extrasensory perception. They are beyond the senses. Definitely. If it was so, they would have seen it. So you mean to say that limitation, what makes orbit for subtle and mysterious is the what you call the relative limitation of the sense organs, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yes. But can we say it is limitation? There are hundreds of people who have gone beyond that. They only talk about all these things.
Yeah.
So it is all normally limited senses. The senses which are never trained. Nobody trains the sensations of the child. Nobody trains the child. Come on. Child says rose flower. Come on baby, come on boy. Look at this flower. What do you see in that flower? You never invited its attention to the details, the possible probable details hiding behind that. The child's intellect will definitely go because there are original engines. I have done that. They can comprehend anything. I told my friends, you can talk particle physics to a 3-year-old child, so long as it is listening. It of course cannot talk back. People do not understand the wonderful power of the child. A 1-year-old child, you can read out a fairy tale and it would listen to that and say, What does it understand? Does a child understand prince, princess, a sword, palace, or a horse? Nothing. But the child has that sensitivity because it is original. And those sensitivities are never trained. That is why. Unless trained, that is the tragedy of the human being. With all the magical powers to see beyond the territories of the galaxies, that human being will not do anything unless it is trained. Because that much of power is given. So normal beings, human beings do not have even that power of even of a local dog or a cat. Because the modern generation, they are all trained in the kindergarten. What training? Which mother or father is training a child? They are all teaching a child. First of all to write, and then some what you call nursery rhymes, and just what you call reporting of little things around. That's all. Not dialoguing. Once I was witnessing an event, about 8:30 p.m. night, I was sitting in the so-called study room of a vice chancellor of a university, a very well-known person, very highly read, he writes books, he writes articles, etc. Then his grandchild, daughter's daughter, came there and asked her something, she called him some name. What are you doing? Nothing. That was the answer. And she left. Actually, he was reviewing the PhD thesis of somebody. Then I told him, oh, sir, why do you say nothing? And there was a discussion and it ended up in a conflict. That's a different issue. So that's all. The parents, the adults assume that the little baby is an idiot. It doesn't know anything. Of course it doesn't know anything. But we can communicate with it about anything. And that's what people do also on the other side. A 2-year-old baby is taken to a so-called temple and say, the God is sitting there, fold your hands, and it does it. What does it understand? Alright. Question number 45. How do you communicate with the environment in orbit 5? Communicate with whom? The environment? At that time, environment carries what? A huge range of varieties of things and entities and phenomena. Okay? That communication is not by words at all. That is, in my language of training my students, that is perhaps possible a little bit with the so-called intent, I-N-T-E-N-T. You can have a moment of intent. Language just cannot communicate. No language in the world, because language is a 100% invention of the human being. And by my scale of creativity, etc., I declare that there is only one and only one invention, something that never existed in any form. That is language, words and sentences, that kind of language. That cannot. This is, I have to be talking a little bit carefully. The so-called God, so-called Almighty God, which almost everybody in the world is so sure about, that must be definitely at the orbit 5. Because in my design of the linkage structure, orbit 5 is the last, where beyond everything. So God, so-called God must be, and to that orbit 5 God, everybody is communicating, let us say, so many thousands and thousands of prayers. They go to the temple or church or wherever and they talk to the God. Let them do it. That's enough. 46. Is there an orbit 0? The point before the linkage begins. Yes. In my structure of orbits, it actually begins with orbit 0, then orbit 1, orbit 2, orbit 3, orbit 4, orbit 5. There is an orbit 0. from where everything originates. In a little baby, everything actually originates. The so-called psychologists and philosophers about children, I have not seen anybody mentioning that. I asked them one question. If unless something originates in the child, what will you do with a little child? Unless the child sounds, how can you train them to talk? Unless the movements of the limbs happen in the child, originated in the child, what are you going to do with it? That is the origin point of all organisms. So that is orbit zero. From where? From that nothingness, about which a great lot of philosophies are there, that nothingness about which the Buddhists call the Turiya-avastha, the beyond nirvana state, where ultimate tuning with the forces of the world happens, finally an individual would reach that origin point, where things are actually nothing for the normal human being. Okay? That's beyond what the Zen calls beyond the sun, beyond the gateless gate. There is an origin point. And I definitely feel that the great rishis of ancient Bharat, they could know about almost everything and anything in the universe because somehow they could tune up with that origin, that nothingness of them. And I would even say that even the universe origin is that kind of a zero orbit, not with a big bang and things like that. It is very, very, very extremely difficult and complex and almost impossible for most of the normal human attention to consider remotely the possibility of a real nothingness from where everything originated. And see, even by the normal logic, everything can originate from nothingness only. Got it, Pavadi? Yeah. Something will originate from something, meaning only of that kind. Okay? If everything has come here, it is from nothingness only. Only nothingness can produce everything. So that center, that ultimate center point of the very universe, there is no center point, is that nothingness which exists everywhere. Nothingness is not something that is stationed somewhere. That nothingness of the universe definitely is ever present and it is the so-called omnipresent and omniscient and omnipotent. That you can understand. At least you can conceive. That's all. This we cannot talk publicly. All right? Question number 47. How do the orbits interact during a moment of crisis? Of course, it depends upon the crisis, which all orbits interact in which all way, it depends upon the kind of crisis. So in the last point, we were talking about the double and nothingness and at that great level. The elements in orbit 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 may interact together. It depends upon your tuning with the orbits. It depends upon your kind of an innocence. It depends upon your integrity. That's what I narrated. For example, when I was doing my second BA in Union Christian College, Alway, I went on a Sunday, I went for a bath in the nearby river, the so-called Periyar River. Very surprisingly, I had taken my bath on that day in the hostel bathroom. Then by noon, my roommate, David Rajiv Kumar Paul, he came from somewhere and said, let's go to the river today to take a bath. And then I told him that, there is a warning from the college authorities that you should not go to that river for bath. What warning? He said, no problem, we will go. So he went to the normal bathing place where people can bath. So because it was 12 o'clock, there were a lot of ladies washing their clothes and all that. Another 100 feet or 200 feet away, there was a place, because of course it was the river bank. It was below the well-known Mangalapura bridge. So I thought anyway I had the bath in the morning, let me try some swimming. I had learned some little bit of swimming in that river before. It was not at all proper, just like that trying. Beating both the legs in the water and things like that. Then I thought I will swim and go to that first pillar of the bridge. It was a huge pillar. Under that pillar there is a platform. So I thought I will reach there somehow. By that time I will be definitely tired. Then I will get onto that platform, sit there, take rest and come back. That was my idea. So I started swimming. Half the way I realized that I was moving away from, it was a flowing river. I was moving away from the direction of the pillar. Because if I had to go to that pillar, I should have started from a further distance. I was starting straight in the direction. So I was not moving forward towards the pillar. I was whatever my effort I had to maintain my direction towards the pillar. Then I realized that things are dangerous. Then again somehow I tried, and then I called out to David Rajikumar Paul, and that was a very funny dialogue. That dialogue was in Malayalam, Asane Poi. That was my dialogue. That is, things are gone out of control. Then he was shouting, then I heard a lot of people shouting from top of the what you call bridge. And they were all shouting many things. Hold on, pidichu nikada, somebody is coming to pick you up. But I am not trying, and now my body is almost perpendicular in the water. Then I realized, this is the time I have to try. Then into my mind, the dialogue of my father came. And water is a bhudam, which is an element. Don't play around with the water. And he narrated some examples of that he was in the military with Subhash Chandra Bose. He said one of the senior captain or commanding officer of the Japanese Navy died in the water. Then he told about the story of one or two swimmers who died in the water. So do not go and play around with the water. All these things I remembered. Then I thought, I was thinking very jokingly, I am going to die here, that's all. Then I thought, okay, let me try. So again I worked hard, almost reaching, I reached the pillar. That was the moment of truth. I realized that the height of the platform was much higher than what I thought. No way my hands reach on the side of that platform to hold on to climb on that. Then there is a lot of people, they are all crying, there is a lot of sound which reverberated under the bridge. And then I thought, okay, I am going to die under this pillar. I was a poet and short story writer, I was narrating my own story like a piece of paragraph in a short story. And the entire side of the pillar was full of that green fungus. It is a huge pillar. Then I just looked at that place, that green place. So this is the place where I am meeting my death. Then I saw a dark spot in that green. Then I pressed there. It was a real hole in that concrete. Maybe because some iron bar was removed, where my entire finger could go. I inserted my entire finger, and on that finger I hang my body. And then after a few minutes, a young boy, a very young boy, maybe about less than 10 years old, he came on the other side, and just a tuck, here I was on the platform, he came near me and said, I will give you my hand, don't pull me. I said, no. Then he gave me a hand. I said, no, it's not required, I am already comfortable here. And then after some more time, two people came in a small boat, and they climbed onto that and they lifted me to the platform. And after some time, they said, we will go back into the boat. I said, no, you come with me, I will swim back. So then I asked him this boy's name. He said, my name is Manoj. Okay, I hugged him and all that. Then I came back, and after a few, 2-3 days, I thought, let me meet this Manoj. Then he said his house is there, and he pointed out. That was on the other side of the river, a little inside. And I went there, taking a cycle on rent. I went there through all the roads, kilometers of distances, all the sub roads. I went to every house and asked, is there a boy by name Manoj? Nobody has heard of such a boy. Anyway, that's a different part of the story. So, what was that? That was the, what you call, interface of all the 5 orbits. So it depends upon your tuning. But even for most people, a great majority of people, their orbits are interacting. A normal worker. Here I am living in a place of the poorest of the poor. They have to go somewhere and get the work in the farms. So today work, there is no work tomorrow. Then they go out, they walk around, and then they go to a nearby little shop, and there somebody is sitting, and they say, tomorrow there is a work there, are you coming? Yeah, yes, I am coming. See, that network is helping him to get a job for tomorrow. And so on and so forth. An entire life of so-called other animals, the birds and the bees and the butterflies in the forest, their existence is possible only because of that interaction of various orbits of their existence. We cannot say they are in a crisis. If you look at it, every day is a crisis for them. Their foods are never guaranteed in the breakfast table. So they are existing by the interaction of their orbits. That's enough. Question number 48. Can one orbit be healthy while the others are in chaos? It could be possible in the lives of many people. It could be a regular feature in the life of the unethical and antisocial and the criminal people. One side it is very healthy. Quite recently, one of the richest businessmen in Kerala state committed suicide by putting a bullet through his head or chest. An extremely rich and flamboyant guy. All lot of people appreciated him, including the main media. We were talking, glorifying his story of his life, how he was, etc., etc. Now, after his death, the national agencies were making an inquiry because he is very well known, and they find a great lot of anomalies, all kinds of unethical practices, all kinds of manipulation of funds, all kinds of cheating and things like that. It is not one orbit. His orbit 1, 2, 3 were all maintained very well. Right? He funded films, he made so many reels. He did even motivation talks to people. Okay, that kind of a guy. We can say almost all unethical people are like that. Their other orbits are in chaos. And there are many other people, apparently in the modern times, their family, they are very, very nice, very beautiful outside, doing a good job, getting good salary, driving a Mercedes-Benz or whatever kind of cars, etc., etc., but their family life is in complete chaos. Okay, or their relationship with the spouse is in complete chaos, orbit number 1. That is close orbit, orbit number 1. Orbit number 2, their children, they don't even interact with them. So, it is quite possible. 49. What is the gravitational pull of the ordinary mind setting on the orbits? Wow!
That is in relation to the other one also. Like, how can you develop the tuning with the orbits? Like, question 47, how can you...
Yeah.
Can one or not that one? How do the orbits interact during a moment of crisis? And you answered by tuning. So this is kind of a question towards that also.
Yeah, what is the gravitational pull of the ordinary mind sitting on the orbits? Huh? Yeah, that gravitational pull will be very minimal only.
Can one develop that?
Yeah, definitely. That's what creativity training in creative analytical thinking. It may take some rigorous time. Okay, that's all. We can talk about developing the gravitational pull of further orbits for a mentally challenged person or a so-called people with personality disorders or mild neurosis, something like that. How a mildly neurotic person is brought back to normalcy. So, so-called ordinary mind setting can be definitely elevated into higher order mind setting. In principle, what is ordinary mind setting? There can be ordinary mind setting because of the lack of opportunities and lack of exposures also. You know. So we can train them. But in general, I think it could be difficult. Because by the very normal distribution of population, 50% is definitely below the average because of various other linkages. That should be the way humanity should be. That's the design of existence in this world. If every human being was equally competent and equally wonderful, it would have been absolute chaos. So, so long as this normal distribution exists, there will be definitely ordinary minds. A so-called gravitational pull orbits would be much less. And we have been discussing that even for normal people, it won't go to orbit 4 and 5. And what about the ordinary mind? So that is a general curiosity question only. 50. How do you expand your orbit without losing your center? This is a conjured question by Gemini. This is not even an intelligent question. If Gemini is asking this question with an understanding of my concept of orbits and linkage network, this question is baseless, actually. Because and if a person is expanding his orbits of wisdom and understanding, he would be all the more centered in the origin. That is the concept of center for me here. But this question can have a meaning from an ordinary perspective. Like a lot of people, when they expand their orbits of wealth and recognition and acceptance and fame and things like that, they lose their connection with their center. That means with their own family or with their original background and things like that, and they put in kind of an artificial self, and thereby they get disconnected with their center. Or they may become careless in their behaviors. They may, like a lot of rich people meet their poor destiny by being flamboyant and being extravagant and doing a lot of unnecessary things powered by the newly found wealth and connection. They will lose their center and they go haywire in that sense. Okay. So how to expand your orbit without losing your center? That needs real education at home. Otherwise, when the orbits of wealth, for example, if they are expanded, it is very likely that normal people will lose their control. Unless they have a background. There are several instances reported and some of them I directly know. That is in case of so-called lottery, state lottery first prizes. One of my friend journalist, he interviewed about 100 people who got first prize in the lottery. That means crores and crores. Almost all of them mismanaged that money and some of them lost even their original savings because they are not familiar with managing that level of the power of money. It is easy for anybody to sit down comfortably and think, if I get 5 crores, I will do this, I will do that, I will do this, I will do that, etc. But when that money comes, then it is different, that they cannot know. Even if somebody advises them and wants them, they say yes, but the money in hand, they lose their power to control themselves.
Yes.
And there are, in a different way, we can say in India, in the ordinary public sector companies, somebody gets promoted from manager to senior manager to divisional manager to vice president and CEO, managing director and all that. Their behavior become very arrogant and careless and a lot of stories. They become mostly unethical. There are a lot of cases of senior officers in Government of India, so-called Indian Administrative Service people, who have done a lot of unethical activities and made a lot of wealth and things like that. Okay, so I would say they lost their center. Mind you, all these 6 components are having their internal dimension also. How do you express to yourself? How do you respond to yourself? How do you behave to yourself? How do you relate with you? How do you do things for you? Like sitting down in meditation, prayer, doing exercises, doing dance, reading and things like that. And how do you maintain your language? To the public you may maintain, but there is a running stream of consciousness. What are the kind of contents of that language which is running through the stream of consciousness? Yeah. Now question number 51. What is the linkage network of a high functioning team? That is so obvious. As much as possible, maximum interpersonal concern and consideration and communication, maximum mutual trust, maximum compatibility of competencies and dedication and commitment to the work and sense of ownership. That's all. Question number 52. How does orbit hopping lead to innovation? That is the orbit of one's learning and experience and understanding of the domain. That is in a way done in most of the so-called creativity techniques. The so-called brainstorming is kind of an orbit hopping. Consciously jumping from one orbit of one standard of consideration of the product or idea, and then consciously bringing in n number of linkages, and first of all, and secondly, you select the most suitable. That's how a lot of innovation are happening today. And perhaps that's how even artificial intelligence was developed. Alright? So that is implied in orbit hopping. That is implied in brainstorming, or synaptics, or controlled projection, or checklist analysis, or a lot of things. But that is in case of innovation, that is possible. Innovation is possible only by orbit hopping, because innovation is applied on a given thing, on a given system, on a given design, or a given setting, or a given process. So there are variables to openly consider. It was told that in Japanese companies there is a lot of innovation happening. There is a so-called group, I forgot the name of that group. They consciously sit down and do all kinds of things. To do an innovation on, for example, shock absorber of a car, somebody will jump like a frog or jump like a deer, or etc., and all those things. Yeah, brainstorming is brainstorming, meaning storm. What happens in a storm? It will just move and shake over almost all existing structures. Okay. So, disregard all existing structures and consciously bring in new structures out of the available. So, I am talking about innovation. But in real creation and originality and discovery, such orbit hopping is not possible.
It's
It is
5
perhaps
o'clock.
an orbit hopping happening inside the engines of the intellect, even without the knowledge and awareness of the so-called individual. Okay. So, for example, that's about creativity and discovery. The question is about innovation, which can be done by orbit hopping. 53. What is the outer limit of human orbit? Absolutely Satori. That's all. Enlightenment for the human entity. At the digital technology level, currently artificial intelligence is almost at the outer limits. So they are trying for creativity and inducing so-called conscience and consciousness in artificial intelligence. If it happens, then that is the outer limit. But I think the digital programming of artificial intelligence can almost never achieve the so-called qualities of the mind of a wonderful human being. Not possible. If at all that is there, what is the advantage for the human being? Then it becomes an independent being and it is enjoying music, let us say so. Then it is like a human being, quite competent. Alright? It is better that artificial intelligence never develops a conscience. That will be the end of artificial intelligence.
Or paradoxically, the end of us also, sir.
Pardon me?
Or paradoxically, the end of us also.
When artificial intelligence achieves consciousness.
Yes, sir, because then it can choose to help a human being or not help a human being. It becomes a choice for itself.
That is for those human beings who depend on artificial intelligence, Technology will finally defeat only technology. It will not defeat humanity, no way. Human beings are, in general, a human entity is the creation of the grand nature process. It is not the father and mother having a sexual activity creating a child, no. The birds and the butterflies and the elephants and the trees and the grass and the human beings are all 100% nature process only. Individuals, by their ignorance of the orbit 0, orbit 1, orbit 2 level, they may end up in danger. Many people may. But technology itself cannot defeat human beings. Of course, atom bomb. Some human beings can do it and perhaps destroy the entire humanity. But I think even before that, many things are possible. Question number 54. How do you tune an orbit that has gone out of phase? That depends on what kind of orbit that has gone out of phase. If it is the orbit of expressions with a boy, due to some reasons, there are methods for that. If orbits of behaviors and responses and actions and ways of relationships and languages are damaged or out of phase, there are methods to do that. There are therapy, various therapies, creativity training, and when the orbit of the physiological process are out of tune, out of phase, then they will be put in the hospitals. That's all. 55.
What about other orbits, higher orbits?
Pardon me?
What about other higher orbits when they are out of phase? How do you tune them?
Higher orbits will be very unlikely that the higher orbits will go out of tune normally, but I understand the implications of your question. That is, somebody is trying to tune up with the nature process and that higher level of advanced attention processes. The system may go a little bit out of control because of the heavy load of the opening of the gates At that time, the so-called guide is there. That guide would do what is required. And that would be individually different. It depends upon the context and the setting. That is definitely possible. And that is the responsibility of a so-called guru or guide. But without the guidance, if the orbit is damaged by itself, then so-called likely problems of the body and mind can happen. Then they will have to suffer that. They may never be able to be corrected. They are the people who walk on the road completely gone mad. So how will we enter? But if someone takes that kind of an interest in somebody, it is not impossible. It is possible. That again depends upon the so-called, according to my understanding, the destiny of a person. 55. What is the silence at the edge of the fifth orbit? Wow! What is the silence? That is the silence of nothingness. It is a kind of a full circle. Just before the zero level, it was nothingness. And at the end, beyond the boundaries of the fifth, it is again nothingness. And nothingness is nothingness. I would say there is not even silence existing. Okay, that is called nothingness. So that is the end of this fourth phase of questions.